Good morning. And I'm saying good morning because I am hosting today's chair chat from the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. And good afternoon to our East Coast and Midwest listeners. I'm so honored to be with you this afternoon on the East Coast, but good morning on the West Coast. And I'm honored to have today as our guest, State Senator Frederick, who represents parts of northern part of Portland. He's also the majority whip in the state Senate here in Oregon. And I'm so honored that he's our guest today on our weekly ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice Chair Chat. We're in Portland this week to host our fall council meeting and our fall conference in collaboration with the ABA State and Local Government Section and also the Young Lawyers Division of the American Bar Association. And I thought it would be important today to have a conversation with a local leader who is on the ground doing the work in Portland, Oregon. So State Senator Frederick, thank you for being our guest this morning.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that.
It's good to have you. Could you first share with our listening audience a bit about your background and your journey to the state legislature?
Thank you very much. Well, given this time of Zooms, I sort of try to pick a picture, a background picture that fits. That the building behind me right now in this picture is where my grandparents started a one-room schoolhouse in southeastern Missouri, in the Boot Heel of Missouri, just outside Hayti and Caruthersville, Missouri. It became they have expanded it and made it into a house, but it was a one-room schoolhouse for the sharecropper kids who lived in that area as their parents went off to pick cotton and chop cotton. They would arrive there, and that's sort of a background for me. That's where I come from. My father was from Dog Bog, Mississippi. That's where he was born. He eventually a sharecropper's kid, but he became a mycologist, one of the leading mycologists in the world, specializing in slime molds and wheat rust and Dutch elm disease. So I come from a whole range of things, but part of my journey obviously began in this situation, in this place behind me, and then ended up doing a lot of other things. I grew up in the South and the Midwest, went to fourth grade in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, not right down the road from where you're from. And I spent my summers with my grandparents in Rhode Island. And I was my first tear gas was when I was 8 years old in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And we moved from Baton Rouge to Atlanta, and literally so the frying pan into the fire. So I spent a great deal of my middle school and high school years dealing with civil rights movement issues, marching on a regular basis, and help desegregate my high school. I was part of a group of 8 people to desegregate my high school in Atlanta back in 1964. So 64, 65. So that's the kind of history, if you will, that I've dealt with. And I've been lucky enough to be involved in a number of things. And I've been out here in Portland since 1974 after I left college in Indiana. I came out here. I went to Earlham College, a little small Quaker school in Indiana, and came out here in 74. And I've been here ever since, except for a year away at MIT. My background's a little strange, a little eclectic, degree in theater, essentially a triple minor, but basically studied a great deal in biology, political science, and psychology. And I have been lucky enough to be out here, fell in love with Oregon in 74, and have been here ever since.
You have a very diverse and interesting background. Thank you for you've kind of been all over the country.
Yeah, yep. All except Alaska. I haven't been to Alaska yet.
Not Alaska, not yet.
That's the only state that I haven't managed to hit.
Wow. Well, I read in your background that you used to be a reporter. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how did you move from being in the media to becoming a politician?
Well, it's not a linear path. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I was a television reporter for 17 years, specializing initially for sort of general assignment, then education, and then science. I was the science reporter for 14 of my 17 years as a television reporter. but I also ended up doing politics as well during that time. One of the reasons I moved to Oregon was because there was a sense of hope out here that we could make some changes, and I got a chance to meet 4 rather high, well-known Oregonians who were politicians. I met them back in Washington, D.C., and the former governor, Tom McCall, former state senators, former U.S. senators, Wayne Morse, Bob Packwood, and Mark Hatfield. I met them all in one form or another when I was back in college and before college. And so I got a chance to have a sense of what they wanted to do and what Oregon seemed to be. So I decided to come out here for that reason, to also do theater, do theater out here, and also because I love my dad a great deal, and my mother and father, but there was clearly a sense that I was not going to be able to do. There was a glass ceiling, let's put it that way, in Atlanta when I was coming through, and I decided that I would go to a place that was that I had to make it for myself, and so that's what I did. I came out here, wonderful. So politics has been part of my life, not necessarily electoral politics, but being involved in the system and trying to make change has been part of my life. My first campaign for anybody was Julian Bond, and he was my next door neighbor in Atlanta. Went around and knocked on doors for him, and my playmates, my playmates when I was in elementary school and middle school were Marty, Yolanda, and Dexter King. So Dr. King was the father of my playmates, and he was, I didn't get over there very often, but I did get over there, and he made it clear that, and my folks made it clear that the idea was that you were supposed to make things better for the people who came after you. And so that's what I've used as my primary theme for my life, no matter what kind of job I had. And I've had a number of jobs, as you said, the reporter, but I was also a ranch hand for a while in Nebraska. I was did molecular biology work for a while. I was a teacher and a musician and an actor, or tried to be an actor. Let's put it that way. I wasn't that good as an actor, but that's what I did. So politics was something that I was expected to do because I've been given a great deal of effort by way of by being a college professor's son and being in that group. Black college professors didn't make a lot of money, but you got a sense that you were going to make a difference. And so that's what I got a chance to do. I got a chance to be part of that culture. And at Southern University and Atlanta University, my father ended up also teaching at Howard at Central States. And when he passed away, he had spent about 8 years at Tuskegee, his alma mater, as a senior researcher there. So there was just an expectation that I was going to, that you, as a family, that was your job, was to make things better for the people who came after you, no matter what your job that you made money at was. That's what you were supposed to do. So that's what I've done.
Wow. Well, you have a remarkable life journey and story. If you've not thought about it, I hope you will think about writing a book about your life. It sounds like you've got a lot of stories and interesting tidbits that the next generation could learn from.
Well, I actually managed to get a vacation about a week and a half ago, and spent some time doing just that, dictating and trying to put together the story. So thank you for confirming that that's the kind of thing I need to do.
You and I have a lot of connections. I didn't know that. We've been introduced through a mutual friend and colleague of ours, my friend from law school, Judge Melvin Odin Orr, who's a judge here in Portland, introduced us. And he didn't tell me you had an Atlanta connection, because I went to Morehouse.
Oh, you went to Morehouse? Oh, my goodness.
And one of my heroes was Julian Bond.
Oh, is that right? My goodness.
The year before he passed away, I have a picture with him at the last NAACP convention that he ever attended.
I remember that convention. I did not attend that convention. Well, I lived right across the street from ITC. So in what was called the compound. So yes, I grew up there. I actually took courses at Morehouse as well. I can't call myself a Morehouse man, but I did take courses at Morehouse during the summers. So.
And I went to law school in Champaign-Urbana, so we got that connection.
My.
Yeah, so But nevertheless, it's clear to me that you have a commitment, a life commitment to civil rights and social justice, either in elective office, in your professional work, in your personal or civic life, and throughout your family as well, and a commitment to education. I'm wondering if you could share with our audience some of the issues that are facing Portland in particular, and particularly if you could talk about the recent history in Portland. As we all know what happened in 2020, in the height of the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd. I know you testified in front of Congress regarding some of the protests here in Portland. Could you kind of share your thoughts around that and where you see things are as of now in 2022?
Well, I think one of the key things is I don't think people really do know what actually happened here in Portland during those protests. I think that it was very carefully created in terms of a narrative on what was taking place in Portland. It was intentionally created that way so that it would discredit as much as possible the issues that we were dealing with, and that included obviously the issues regarding George Floyd. I put this in a very simple fashion for me, and I've been working on these ideas for many years now, a decade or more now, talking about the fact that I want to feel safe in my community. I want to feel safe in my community, but I want to feel safe not just in terms of somebody causing a problem for me, but I also want to feel safe when I call a police officer and somebody who's a public safety person, and I call them and they will treat me safely as well, that they will treat me well. And that's the issue that I kept running into. We continue to run into. In fact, I think there's even the court case begins today on a couple of situations where police officers were cited for excessive use of force related to those demonstrations. So I guess there's several things that come to me when I start think about those demonstrations and what we try to do here. First of all, there were huge demonstrations here in Portland. There were huge demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations here in Portland. But there were some agents provocateurs who came into Portland as well and had been here before, and they knew that they could try to discredit any demonstrations, any concerns by creating violence. And so you would have 10,000 people, literally 10,000 people, walking and lying down on the bridge, and you'd have one person who would decide that they would try to break a window, and people would try to stop them from doing that. But late at night, you started to get people who were setting up fires and not being approached for it. They were not being really. Their crime was not being addressed. And many of those folks I recognized from previous demonstrations, and they had been previous demonstrations that were folks from the Proud Boy groups and the right-wing groups that had been in Portland setting up confrontations of one form or another, but not being addressed in ways, because as a television reporter, I used to have to be right up in front to see what was going on. As an observer in this situation, I could stand back and watch where things were and who was doing what. And I began to clearly see what was taking place and who was getting the kind of attention from the police than others and who was not getting that attention. I kept running into that on a regular basis, where there would be somebody who would step off the curb, a peaceful demonstrator who would step off the curb, and they would immediately be knocked down by a police officer, saying that they were not obeying a lawful command, when in fact all they did was step off the curb. They may have been protesting the way that the police were handling things, and that seemed to be the primary reason that they were being harassed or using excessive force against, but they were not doing anything that was a real problem. At the same time, I saw some of the Proud Boy folks and other folks using lighter fluid to start fires on concrete and marble areas, and watching until they could see the cameras around them, and then lighting the thing on fire And so the pictures that you often got were these large fires taking place. But if you notice, if you look at those pictures, with very few exceptions, you don't see a lot of Black folks talking about that. You have a lot of young white men who are doing this. And if you look carefully, you'll see that in many cases they had their faces covered, not because they were trying to they were trying to just be covered. They had their faces covered because they didn't want to get recognized for setting the fires. And they also knew in many cases that they were not going to be taken into custody. They were not going to be taken, the police were not going to come in and arrest them for one reason or another. I mean, there were several reasons that police officers came, but one of the unfortunate reasons, I think, is that in many cases there was an affinity for those folks who had a particular approach. There was an affinity for those folks, and they simply did not go in and arrest the people that they needed to arrest. So that's part of what we kept seeing as well here.
Is it your sense that those people were coming from outside of Portland, or were they local residents that lived here?
They were coming from outside of Portland. Now, there may have been some folks who were from Portland as well. But I mean, one of the classic situations you would see, and we saw this a great deal here. We saw peaceful folks walking along. They would be peaceful folks walking along, and they would be having helmets, and they would have vests of one form or another, because they were defensive vests. They were not attacking folks. But that scared people, because there was at least officially scared the police, because they thought that if they had helmets and vests, then they were going to attack them. You didn't see a lot of attacks taking place from those particular people. But late at night, you would get a group of young white men, quite frankly, who would decide that they wanted to do something. Where they were coming from is not clear, but a number of them in the past had come from outside of Portland, and they had come from all sorts of places. I mean, they were coming from Washington and California, Nevada, Idaho, as far away as I understand it as Wisconsin and Illinois.
Wow.
Wow. So and if you look at some of the recent reports, some of the stories that have been done, you will find that some of those folks, it was a coordinated effort to try to get as much violence as possible. And it was violence that was really visible violence. There wasn't a lot of people violence until the feds showed up here in unmarked uniforms, right. And they began to shoot at people. And I was downtown for several of those demonstrations, and I saw them set up. I had pepper balls spray hit me as well, and not pepper spray, but pellets hit me as right. well. And so I had that take place, and had a lot of, you could see, I mean, it was pretty amazing. The tear gas was there, but when they showed up, remember that they showed up, and then they started taking people off the street in unmarked vans. They showed up in force. They were going to, really show everyone. And what happened, the response to that was that the demonstrations that had been winding down to 200 or 300, maybe 400 people, suddenly went to 7,000. I mean, it was pretty amazing. And the demonstrators included a group of moms who were standing there in yellows, just standing in a line, and they were getting tear gas. The mayor of Portland was standing there saying, you need to leave. We don't want these folks. You're firing tear gas at people that you don't need to fire tear gas at folks at. Wow. And the mayor got tear gas, and a lot of other folks got tear gas as they were peacefully demonstrating, not setting fires. They were not the ones setting fires, and they were standing right in front of folks doing that. The other aspect is, and this is something that I saw in previous demonstrations, was that there would be people in the crowd who would try to set up a confrontation, try to set up a fear situation. And if they didn't set up the fear situation that way, and I saw that they went to the back of the crowd and they had wrist slingshots, and they would fire ball bearings over the crowd to the police. So the police thought that things were coming from the front of the crowd, these ball bearings. They were in fact coming from behind the crowd.
Wow.
And people were, so you get this kind of a sense that they were under attack, but they weren't under attack from the people standing right in front of them. They were under attack from other folks, and those other folks who in fact were set up so that they could attack. So you had a long agents provocateur situation take place. And I've got to say this is not the first time I've dealt with agents provocateurs. In Atlanta, when I was in high school, we began to talk about certainly the Vietnam War, and we had a peace group that was meeting with the Vietnam War. We had one guy who showed up several meetings, and we were talking about, peaceful demonstrations. He said to us at the third meeting I think he was at, he said, I've got some C4. We could blow up the Selective Service Office if you'd like to do that. I can get a hold of that. And we said, that's not what we're about. We want you, if you're about that, you need to go someplace else, because that's not what we do. 4 years later, I was walking in downtown Atlanta, and I looked over and saw this guy. So I walked up to him, and I think his name was Dan or Doug or something like that. And I said, how you doing? And he looked at me and he said, what do you want? And I said, well, I saw you. I saw you about 4 years ago. I just wondered how you doing. He said, I'm okay. Leave me alone. You need to move along. And I went, all right, fine. He was in an Atlanta police uniform. He had been an undercover person at that time. This is not a new situation. My father told me stories of similar kinds of things taking place. So this is the kind of thing that has taken place, and it was taking place here in Portland, especially during those demonstrations, because it was politically, it was a very active, as you remember, 2020, very active political year. You needed to set fear as one of the key elements there, and that was clearly one of the strategies that was being used to try to set it up so that there could be an insurrection, which we saw January 6th. But there could be justification for an insurrection. So we were, in fact, I think, a dress rehearsal for a number of things, and that was one of those things. And that's what I saw within the demonstrations. Now, having said that, the other thing that happened that they didn't expect was in the legislature. We started because of that, because we had people from across the state, and Oregon is only 2% African American. So we had people from across the state upset about the George Floyd situation. That we ended up passing a slew of bills that dealt with excessive use of force, recruitment, training, assessment of how well police officers and staff were doing, housing, education, economic development. We managed to get money to go to African Americans as well as to Latinx folks and Asian Americans and other migrants. We managed to get healthcare issues settled during that time because people recognized that it was not a made up issue, that this was not somebody with a chip on their shoulder. This was, in fact, an issue that was affecting not only the folks who didn't look like them, but also their neighbors and how people were responding. So we passed a lot of bills in 2020. We passed a lot of bills in 2021. We passed bills in 2022. We still have a momentum. And there's another aspect that was really interesting for Oregon. When I moved into the Oregon legislature, there was just one African American in the House and one African American in the Senate. I was the only African American in the House. Jackie Winters, a Black woman from Salem, was the African American in the Senate. The joke for me was that whenever I walked over to see Jackie, the whole Capitol tilted just a little bit. But the fact is that after a lot of the support and a lot of the effort by me and a number of other folks, in the last legislative session, which was in February, we had 15 people of color in the legislature. It went from 2 to 15, and in this upcoming election, I think we will see 18, perhaps 20 out of 90 legislators. there will be that many. So that's the kind of change that has taken place, and I can't be happier about that.
You have a fascinating story, and I wish we had more time to unpack this, but let me just ask you as we wrap up, what are the lessons learned? What would you share with lawyers specifically around the country about the need to be engaged in public policy and civil rights, social justice? It sounds like you might encourage some of us to perhaps consider running for office. But beyond that, or including that, what takeaways would you offer to us, particularly as we spend this week in your city?
Well, first of all, enjoy the city. We have quite a bit. I mean, it is a beautiful place, and there are lots of places, lots of things to do. I think the key element for me is to find out who's not been heard, and listen. You can run for office, and people run for office for all sorts of reasons. For me, it's to try to make sure that there's a perspective that's there that has not been heard, and also listen to the folks who are out there. Now, I spend a lot of my time now in rural Oregon talking with folks outside of the metro area, as well as people here. But it's a matter of understanding what the concerns are and the fears and the goals. I mean, so listen to folks, and then think about what you'd like to see in the world. How would you like to see the world take place? Use your skills and your legal background to step into that. I have my chief of staff is a law student. I have a couple of other folks who are law students as well, who are working with me. The key thing is, what next? What would the world look like next? That's what I'd like to see folks think about.
Wow, that's a powerful piece of advice. Think about who's not been heard and think about what's next. I appreciate that advice that we will share with our lawyer leaders throughout the section and the American Bar Association.
Great.
Senator Frederick, thank you for your time. I appreciate your wise counsel. I hope that you would be willing to join us again at some future date.
Let me know.
To continue this conversation, because clearly you have a lot of wisdom and perspective and insight. I had 9 questions for you, only got to 2.
Well, unfortunately, I'm a former teacher, and my folks are my family is either preachers or teachers, so we can talk for a long time. So,
thank you very much. You have a great rest of your day, and we will definitely keep in touch.
Thank you. You take care.